Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today's lesson is going to be on pins. How many of you have ever heard of the line pin and win? Well, that is referring to the pin. In chess, there are two kinds of pins: absolute pin and the relative pin. We're going to learn about both pins in this lesson. All right, an absolute pin is when the pin piece can't legally move. So if it's white to move, we can put this black knight in an absolute pin by going right there. And you notice this knight cannot move because if it does, it'll put its own king into check. You guys know you can't do that. So this is an absolute pin, and this will lead to a loss of material because the knight can't move. The rook is attacking it. And let's say the king moves out of the pin. So now the knight's not pinned, but it's white to move, and the knight is gone. All right, so this is an absolute pin where the pin piece cannot move. And next we have a relative pin. A relative pin is when the pin piece can move, but if it does, it will lead to material loss. It is white to move. You notice this knight, it's in a relative pin. It can move, but if it does, then the bishop is just going to win the knight. So let's say if the knight goes here, then the bishop will capture the rook. So this is a relative pin where the pin piece can legally move, but if it does, it will lose material. All right, let's take a look here. All right. By the way, in the last example, can white save this knight, or can it prevent losing material? Yeah, it can just move there to protect the knight. All right, so then if the bishop takes, that's an even trade. All right, here it is black to move. Black can put white in a relative pin. Do you see the diagonal? You see the rook and the knight on the same diagonal? So the black bishop could play right here. And this knight is in a relative pin. The knight can move, but if it does, it's going to lose the rook. Is there any way after black plays bishop e4, is there any way for the white rook to save this knight? No, because pawns are blocking. And so this relative pin is going to lead to a loss of material. There's nothing white can do to prevent losing the knight. Okay, let's move on. All right, it is black to move here. And can black pin white? Yes, right here. That is a pin. That's the only square black can pin the white bishop on. What kind of pin is it? Is it an absolute or a relative pin? Remember, an absolute pin is where the piece that is pinned cannot legally move. A relative pin is where the pin piece can legally move, but if it does, it's going to lead to material loss. So this is an absolute pin. This bishop cannot move. And will this lead to a win of material for black? Yeah, because after the king moves, black's going to get the bishop. So that was an absolute pin. It is white to move and pin. How can white pin this black knight? Where can the bishop move to pin this knight right here? Yes, there you go. By the way, when I ask questions, if you ever want to pause the video to try to find it yourself, you are welcome to do so, and you can push play when you are ready. All right, what kind of pin is this? It is a pin. We have the bishop behind the knight, and the king is behind the knight on the same diagonal. Is that a relative pin or an absolute pin? Can this knight move anywhere? Nope. That is an absolute pin, because if the knight moves, it'll be putting its own king into check. So the knight cannot move. Will this lead to a win of material for white? Yes. All right, next up here. All right, we have another white to move and pin. Can you find the move for white that pins the black rook? All right, if you found bishop c4, you are correct. That is a pin. Is it an absolute pin or a relative pin? Absolute. This rook cannot move anywhere. It cannot move because if it does, it'll put its own king into check. Will that lead to a win of material for white? Yep. After the king moves out of the way, or after the king gets out of the pin, white will just capture the rook. All right, black to move here. Is black in an absolute or relative pin? Is this knight in a pin? Yeah, because behind it is the queen. But what kind of pin is it? Is it an absolute or is it a relative pin? Can this knight legally move? Yes, it can. Yes, it can. But if it does, will that lead to material loss for black? Yep. White will get the queen. So this is a relative pin. The black knight can legally move, but if it does move, it's going to lead to material loss. All right. Oh, quick question here. What should black do? Should black stay or get out of this pin? What would be a good way for black to get out of the pin? Yeah, so generally when you're in a pin, you don't want to stay in a pin for too long. So here, black wants to get out of the pin. But black, what would be a safe way for black to get out of the pin? This is one way, but it doesn't get out of the pin right away because the knight is still pinned. It just allows the king to protect the knight, and the queen can get out on the next move. But is there a quicker way for black to get out of the pin? Yeah, right here. There you go. The queen protects the knight because you want to protect the knight. You don't want to lose the knight. The queen protects the knight, and it gets out of the pin. So the knight can move on its next move if the bishop doesn't take. So that would be one way to get out of the pin there. Queen moving to d6. All right, white to move and pin. All right, white to move. Looks like the bishop and the king are on the same file here. So this is the piece that's probably going to be getting pinned, the bishop. Can you find the pin? Right here. Yep, that is a pin. What kind of pin is it? Absolute or relative? Absolute pin. This bishop cannot move anywhere because it'll be putting its own king into check. And will that lead to a win of material? Yep. Because after the king is out of the pin, white will capture. All right, white to move and pin. All right, so look at the rook and the king on the same diagonal. Where can the white queen move that will pin this rook to the king? Did you find queen to g4? Yep, that is a pin. What kind of pin is it? Relative or an absolute pin? Can the rook move? No, it cannot get off of this square because it's pinned. So that's an absolute pin. Will this lead to win a material for white? Yep. King gets out of the pin, and then the queen will capture. All right, let's see here. It is white to move. So is this knight here pinned? Yes, that is a pin, but what kind of pin is it? By the way, it's a pin because the queen is on the same diagonal as this knight, and the black bishop is attacking here. Is it a relative or absolute pin? Can this knight legally move? Yes, it can. But what happens if it moves? Yeah, it'll lead to material loss. So this is a relative pin. The knight is pinned. But if it moves, it will lose material because the queen will be captured. What should white do here? White has a pinned knight. Should white stay in this pin? Should white get out of the pin? If you vote for getting out of the pin, what would be a good way for white to get out of the pin? Well, you could just move the queen out of the way, but is that a great way to get out of the pin? It's not so great. It does kind of weaken the white king a little bit and fractures a little slightly the white's pawn structure. Is there a better way for white to get out of the pin? Yeah, bishop e2. That gets out of the pin. And now white can move the knight, and if the bishop captures, the queen will capture, and it'll be an even trade of material. So I think that would be the best way to get out of the pin, playing bishop e2, and it also doesn't weaken the white king or weaken its pawn structure. All right, so that is probably the best way to get out of the pin. You can also try this. That might be another way. That's another good way to get out of the pen because black's not going to go there because it's going to lose material. So it'll have to go back, maybe here. And so that also gets out of the pen. So I think, yeah, there's a couple good ways. That's a good way to get out of the pen. And if the black takes, then white will capture back, and that's an even trade. Bishop's worth 3, knight's worth about 3. And another good way to get out of the pen is bishop e2. So those are two good ways to get out of the pen, the relative pen. All right, here we go. White to move in pen. Is this an absolute or relative pin here? Well, first, how can we pin? You see the black queen on the same file as the king. How can we take advantage of this with this open file here? Can we pin the queen to the king? Yes, we can. We can either go this rook or this rook. Either way is good. And can the queen get off of this file to avoid material loss? Is this an absolute or relative pin? It's an absolute pin. The queen cannot move off the file. So so whatever happens here, black or white's going to get a queen for a rook. There'll be a +4 for white. So that is a absolute pin, pinning the queen to the king. All right, white to move and pin. Let's look at the diagonals here. Here we go. Yes, bishop b5. That is a pin. Is that a relative or absolute pin? Can this knight move anywhere? No. The knight can't, because if it does, it'll put its own king to check. That is an absolute pin. Well, is this pin going to lead to material loss for black? Yeah, because the king cannot come here to protect the knight because the rook is on this file. So when the king just gets out of the way here, white will capture the knight. And here we have another pin. It's a little trickier. Black to move and pin the queen to the king on this rank right here. How can black pin the queen to the king? Can you see it? If you found rook e4, very good. You notice that the bishop protects the rook. And can the queen get off of this rank here? No. So this is an absolute pin. The queen is going to lose itself for the rook. If it wants to capture, that's fine, but the bishop is on the rook, protecting it. And that wins material for black. If white tries to get out of the pin, black is just going to capture the queen, and that'll be a win of material for black. All right. Okay, we have a couple more left, few more. It is white to move. Can you find 3 pins for white? White to move, to pin this rook. Do you notice the rook on the diagonal with the king here? Can you find the 3 squares where the white queen can pin the rook? You notice that this is the diagonal. That's the diagonal you're going to pin the rook to the king. So it's going to be these 3 squares right here. All 3 of those squares work. That works. That square pins the rook. That square pins the rook. And this square pins the rook. Will that lead to a win of material? Yep. Because the rook cannot move. The rook's in an absolute pin. The king gets out of the way. Queen will capture. All right. Can you find a move here for white that will pin 2 pieces? White to move to pin 2 pieces. See if you can find it. If you want to pause the video, go ahead and do that. All right. Did you find queen to c4? Look at that. 2 pins. And we have different kinds of pins, don't we? This is an absolute pin. The bishop's in an absolute pin. It can't move because it'll put its own king into check. And the knight is in a relative pin. It can move, but the queen is hitting the rook. Is there a way for this knight, though? Is there a square the knight can move to that can protect the rook? Yeah, right there. c7. So now it's protected. So the white queen does not want to capture the rook, because if it does, the knight will capture. That will lose material for white. So the best move for white would be what? Yeah, just to capture the bishop with check. Okay. So that was 2 ways. That was 2 pins. absolute and the relative. And then last one, last little puzzle here. You notice that the white queen is pinned. It's on this diagonal here. The black bishop is pinning the queen to the king. That is an absolute pin. This queen cannot get off the diagonal because the white king will be even a check. And if the queen captures, then the black queen will capture back, and that will also lose material for white. But is there a way white can save the queen? Can you save the white queen that is pinned? If you need to think about it, push pause and come back when you think you found the solution. Okay, if you found bishop f4, beautiful, a double pin. We have a pin here, but now we have a pin here. So this black bishop cannot capture the queen because then its own king will be in check. So we have a double pin. So here, black's best move is probably just to capture the bishop, but then white now can capture this queen, a rook with check, and that is how white can get out of the pin, by doing a pin of its own, pinning the pinner, and that saves the white queen. Very nice. All right, hope you enjoyed this lesson on pins. Pins are a common tactical theme in chess, and hopefully you'll see more pinning opportunities now in your own games to win material. Okay, see you guys next time. Bye-bye.